think we have a complete disregard for our environments.
Water is drying up, which is kind of silly because it rains all the time everywhere.
35 to 38% of the greenhouse gases are produced by just 5 materials.
सरकार हमेशा बहुत अच्छी स्कीम्स लाता है, बट वो लोगों तक नहीं पहुंचती है.
There's so much research around solutions, so where is that gap?
We have found more than 25 ways of building earthquake-safe buildings without using cement.
What will people pay for? People will pay for design.
We thought of coming up with a model solution that can be easily replicated.
With analytical tools available, it really makes sense to use data to optimize design.
We're facing a climate emergency, but it's not irreversible if we act swiftly and decisively.
I wanted to build an Uber for waste. Every bit of waste is a resource.
The footprint of this project is hardly 20% of the entire site because the unbuilt is as important as the built.
Very quickly I learned that the person making the big decisions was the person who is controlling the money.
I think adaptive comfort has to come back into picture.
You have to talk to the people. If you want the project to reach somewhere, you have to involve them in the process.
अगर कोई बहन एम्पावर हुई तो वो बेनिफिट पूरे एंटायर फैमिली को मिलेगा.
Tiling industry is massive. Even if you change 10% of it, there's a huge carbon emission saving that we would do.
Now this is suddenly sustainability that is offered not at a premium.
Disruption can bring the world to its knees, but it can also breed innovation. The act of building is inherently at odds with nature. It consumes resources, impacts plant and animal life, and destroys natural ecosystems that have taken years, if not centuries, to evolve. But with 8 billion people and counting, the fact that humans must and will continue to build is a no-brainer. So then the question becomes, how must we build? That's the question we shall be posing today to Anjali Mangalgiri, founder of Grounded, an ecologically sensitive architecture practice based in Goa. So Anjali, what I want to start with today is your move from the US to India. You studied architecture at SPA Delhi, you moved to MIT to pursue city planning, and then Columbia for real estate development. At what point did you decide that you're going to come back to India?
So basically I studied city planning after SPA because at SPA there was this kind of culture that urban design was cool and urban design was, you know, more intellectually bent than pure architecture, which I disagree with now. And hence I thought that's what I wanted to study. I really enjoyed my education at MIT. It really opened up my mind, my brain. It exposed me to so many other facets of city development, of architecture, of human life that pure architecture didn't expose me to, right? So we studied policy, environmental factors, learnt about stakeholders, community development. So there were a lot of these dots that connected in my head. After that, I was working in New York with HOK, doing urban planning, and I got jaded fairly quickly because we were doing urban planning projects at various scales, from university scale to mixed-use development, which was public-private partnerships, to large township developments as well. And most of the time, we were talking the talk. We were talking about the right things. We were talking about pedestrianization. We were talking about multimodal transportation. We were talking about rainwater harvesting on an urban scale. Cool roofs, all the good stuff. But then planning projects tend to be very long term. There are multiple stakeholders and execution takes a really long while, and hence seeing the impact takes decades, even if the project is realized, right? So very quickly I learned that the person making the big decisions on the table was the person who is controlling the money, right? And hence that led me to go back to school to study real estate development, because I thought that, okay, we as architects have a lot of great ideas, but we don't have the power to make decisions. So can I, take that role in some way, and hence push the right decisions forward. And that actually was one of the reasons that led me to come back. When I actually decided to come to Goa in 2010 to start Grounded, we started with a bit of a hybrid model, which is the architecture developer model. So the idea behind this model was to put out an example to show that building homes that are architecturally relevant, that are built with nature, actually have buyers. There is a market for it and they can be economically viable.
The builder-architect model that you seem to practice here, which again gives you a lot of control over final outcomes, the ability to sometimes choose clients at your own will. How do you see that model versus mainstream architecture, in terms of the advantages it offers you and what you've been able to achieve with that model?
So I like both. We do both. We do traditional architectural consulting and we build houses in Goa that we sell. I both have pros and cons, but yes, we started with this architecture developer model because I didn't want to have to deal with the constraints of convincing clients about this practice of let's build sustainably, let's build around trees, let's use more natural materials. I wanted to build it and then see and prove to myself and to the market that there is a buyer out there. So you're absolutely right. It gives me a lot of control. We can go ahead and execute, rainwater harvesting, which comes at an additional cost. We can execute other sustainable techniques which also come at an additional cost, not just in terms of the product and the technique, but also sometimes our cost, because we're spending a lot more time on it. But as long as I can realize it in my profit in the end, I'm okay. And we have found now over the 13 years that we have existed that there is a tremendous demand for it. And the supply, of course, is limited in this segment. Most of our clients are already engaged with sustainability when they come to us, and that's what attracts them to us.
It's very interesting because, the popular belief is that architects are having to convince their clients. Do you see already a shift in mindset in the larger world?
Yes, 100%. The clients that come to us are already convinced. They are already, they respect nature, they are birders, they are avid wildlife enthusiasts, they're going trekking. Like, those are the people we attract. So we are very lucky. We don't have to go that extra mile to convince them about, sustainability and incorporating that into their homes. The reason also why they're coming to Goa is to get away from the chaos of cities. So they're not coming to Goa because they want their Goa house, our clients. And they are coming to Goa because they actually want to live in peace with nature, coexist with the plant and animal life, and really engage with the earth, with the fresh air, with all the sounds and sights of nature.
I think in your work, I personally see hints of Baba, and then there's Ken Yang, and there's more. Who did you look up to for inspiration, and who do you continue to look up to for inspiration? And especially, I think, with the kind of work that you do, it's so technically sound.
I think in our industry of architects, we have no dearth of talent, and not just our past masters, even in the contemporary kind of architects who are practicing today. And let's just talk about India and South Asia. I love Samira Rathod. She knows it. So I love how bold she is with architecture, and I hope that we want to do more of that. In the past, as you said, Baba, a lot of Sri Lankan architects have had a lot of influence on us, obviously because they were practicing this tropical modernism. Right. Then there was Kerry Hill, who was also doing tropical modernism, which we really aspire towards in a more contemporary manner. So our work really does range between a more rustic Bawa to a more contemporary Kerry Hill. And then the range kind of varies based on clients' likes and dislikes a little bit.
I think now I want to get into your work through 4 different lenses. I think you're working largely in Goa and you work with greenfield sites. Now that's a challenge in and of itself. So if we were to drill down into these 4 lenses, number 1 is land. You're working with sites that are sometimes virgin, and you inherit this amazing sort of heritage of trees and plant life and animal life. So if you were to only focus on land for a second, what is your approach when you start a project? How do you strategize to save that precious resource on your sites?
The way you deal with land is you don't disturb it as much as possible. So basically, if it's a sloping site, you design a building that works with the slope. If it's a rocky site, you try to incorporate the rocks into it. If it's a wooded site, you try to incorporate the trees. So basically, try to not disturb the land as much as possible. And especially virgin greenfield sites where we are lucky to build beautiful, green sites with beautiful views. The reason why we're going there is because of nature, because of what exists. So it would be really sacrilege on our part if we go and just destroy everything and then try to recreate it by creating beautiful landscapes. Just as an example, one of the first things that we do before we start construction is, because again we're talking about greenfield sites, we have really good topsoil on all our lands. Some of these sites have been farmlands, right? So we actually take off the top layer of the soil, the topsoil for the plinth area, and we stockpile it so that it can be reused for landscaping later. The point is, why waste that good organic soil in filling of foundations when you can actually reuse it for your landscaping?
I think the second thing I want to get into is water and how water interacts with your site in multiple ways. So you have natural systems of water that are sort of flowing through your site. And invariably when you're building, you're disrupting those flows. Totally. And then the other sort of big challenge that we're all fighting against today is that, how do we build so that we have water all through the year, all through the seasons on our sites? So how do you plan for that? And how do you, what's the big picture in your head? Because you're also looking at recharging groundwater, and it's a concern today.
Yeah, absolutely. Water is critical. And as we know that, water is drying up, which is kind of silly because it rains all the time everywhere in the world, right? So how can water be drying up? But we don't have drinking water. And even in Goa now, our groundwater levels are dropping. In Goa, there are houses and communities and villages which require tanker water, which is shocking for a place with such high rainfall, right? And low density. So we really are very respectful towards water. And we really do treat it as a very critical resource that we have to respect, protect, recharge, as you said. So in this house, for example, we dug a well, and we are very close to the fields. So in Goa, they say that the rice fields are where, you are very close to the underground water levels. So since we are very close to the fields, we had estimated that we'll get water at around 3 meters. But once we started digging the well, we got water at 20 meters, which was shocking to us. But then what we've done is that after this house is done, has been built, and we've planned it that all the roof water we collect and we put it back into the well. So we recharge the groundwater. Another technique is that all the external paving is designed to be permeable. So all the rainwater that falls on the ground percolates back into the groundwater. We've seen results in a year after the construction was done when the well water level has come up. So during monsoons now, the water level is 3 meters or even less. And then we can reuse that well water for landscaping and for the pool and for the house's use as well. So this house definitely has never had to get a tanker. So it's a big win.
I think with House of Three Pavilions, this just took on a life of its own, water management?
During one of my very first site visits, which was around the monsoon, I think it was around July or so, we found that there was a natural depression in the center of the site, and there was a lot of rainwater that was going there. It was a natural pond. The water would percolate, and there was a wetland ecosystem that was, that was existing there. There were water birds, there were dragonflies, there were frogs, turtles, and that really had a strong impact on us, and we really wanted to preserve that while we insert human habitation around it. So we started looking into it. We worked with environmental planners, and the first thing we did was we actually got a topo map of the area. And we realized, very interestingly, which you will not know when you're at the site, that there's almost like a U that forms, which are hills, and our site is kind of just at the center of it. In the regional context, it's very small.
So it's collecting water from...
Exactly. So it is actually on the path of the watershed from the hills, and then this water goes into these stormwater drains that finally ends up in the ocean, right? So if we had built another concrete structure without thought for the stormwater drainage, we would have basically blocked that system. And what happens when you block these systems, right? It's like plugging like a pipeline. So it would lead to flooding in other low-lying areas in the villages. And obviously, right, it leads to your groundwater getting depleted. So we designed another pond. We deepened it. There was an existing well. We deepened the pond to make it go down to the water level, to the underground water level. It is a seasonal pond, so it dries up in the summers, it fills up in the monsoon. The wetland ecosystem has been restored. The habitat of the existing animal and insect life has been restored. There are dragonflies there now again. Dragonflies are a sign that the water quality in that area is very good. Once you start to do all this research, you realize how much water there really is, So we're all talking about like no water and water shortage, but then once you start designing these things, you actually end up with the problem of too much water. So the pond in itself just couldn't contain the amount of rainwater that we were putting into it. So we then designed this system of network of bioswales that run all across the site, and when the pond overflows, it fills into these bioswales. And the idea for the bioswales is it spreads the water over a larger surface area. And these bioswales are not cement. They're meant to be, such that they absorb water. So they're built with natural laterite. So the bioswales fill up when there is a burst of rain and there is overflow from the pond, but then the water is absorbed back into the ground. The groundwater gets recharged over a larger surface area. So not only does it, keep your water level, underground water level high, but it also keeps your soil moist for most of the site. Hence, it reduces the amount of water required for irrigation. And the biggest advantage is that it creates a habitat for the existing bird, animal, insect life that lived on that property before we went in with our intervention. So the humans really get to coexist with nature.
So as I'm sitting here at this lovely property, I think the one thing that stood out to me also was the sheer diversity of plant and animal life that I'm seeing here. How do you sort of go about planning that? Because once you've constructed the site, or while you're constructing the site, do you have landscape consultants on board, and you create a strategic plan for how you will introduce plant life into the site?
Yeah, I mean, landscaping is very important for us in all our projects. We have until now not really worked with the landscape architect. We do it in-house. I have a really wonderful horticulturist who I work with, and we've worked together for now more than 10 years. So he understands what our intent is and what our expectations are. But really, it's about, if you want to attract bird life, insect life, then you basically have to have a lot of fruiting, flowering plants. We try to plant a lot of native species, which obviously are food and habitats for the local animal life and insect life and birds. And we intermix things. So it's not as if we don't do the heliconias, you know, it's not as if we don't do the palms. We do those, but then we intersperse them with a lot of flowering and fruiting trees, which are local. If you do white flowers, that attracts moths at night. We do a lot of fragrant flowers around our courtyards and swimming pools and verandas for humans. And we're really learning this. There is such a dense world of information out there. One more thing that's very close to my heart are the wildflowers. So in Goa also you'll see, as you drive down the village roads throughout the year, the wildflowers change. As the future of Grounded, we hope that we can actually have a seed bank where we collect seeds and we have the information about the wildflowers in different seasons, and those can be planted. I mean, planting grasses in landscapes is really in vogue, but let's not just plant grasses because they look really good in photographs, right? But let's plant the wild ones that are native to the land.
I think with biodiversity also, like you said, you're creating this habitat that then begins to attract even more biodiversity to it. And therein sort of you run into the problem of sometimes clients and people not necessarily wanting to exist with nature, right? Because it's a very thin line. You want to exist with nature, but you also want some space to yourselves. So have you had to deal with that with your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, in this house, there is a mongoose that comes and swims in the swimming pool. And she's a welcome guest, So, but if you ask the caretaker, he'll tell you that she only comes when the house is very quiet. So, honestly speaking, wildlife doesn't want to come close to humans. They know that we are the people who are trying to get rid of them, so they're scared of us. They don't want to come close. But architecturally, when we build, we do design the home such that the interior spaces cannot really be, the insects and the snakes and the frogs. They can't really get to the interior of the house. But then outside in the garden, the point is to really actually coexist with them. And so if there is a snake who has a house, he will live in his house peacefully and you live in yours. They're not the same. They're different. And if people are coming to places like Goa and outskirts of Bangalore now, we're building in we built in Lonavala. If you're going to all of these places, the reason is that you want to be closer to nature. But then if you want to eradicate it and just create a beautiful garden, then I think that beats the purpose.
I think the next thing I want to get into is managing waste on site. There's a lot of conversation about sites that are net zero on waste or buildings that are net zero on waste. So where do you stand on that? Because I've heard arguments from either end and I'm not sure what's right, what's wrong. So can you help deconstruct that for us?
I mean, we are creating waste at a tremendous scale, first of all, at all levels, at all scales. So when you're building a building, we are lucky to have nothing on the site, so we don't have to deal with construction waste from the get-go. But one thing that we do is we actually refill our plinth. Instead of doing it with rock, we try to use construction waste. So construction waste which would otherwise just be dumped. Other waste is human habitation. When we're living in these homes, we're creating a lot of waste and a lot of organic waste. We're big proponents of composting. I think on sites like this or any home, it's a must. It is a fairly brainless activity, and if you do it right, there is no smell and you have good homegrown compost to be used in your own home, right? Yeah, so there is a lot of leaf litter on large sites like this, and if you combine that with the organic waste from the kitchens, it's great material for amazing compost, which again goes back into the same garden. So it's just so beautiful to be able to reuse your waste in a positive way.
And what about grey water?
Now that is interesting. There is a lesson to be learned there. In our first house, we actually did do grey water treatment on the site itself. We, used the sort of root zone treatment, and we created the ponds and the succession of ponds that are required. We did a lot of research. We implemented it. But once it was done, what I realized was that again, it's maybe not a technique which is appropriate for second homes in Goa for multiple reasons. One is that second homes are not occupied all the time, so you're actually not creating that much grey water and black water, and hence the system, which is a living system, is not fed by the dirty water, and hence that system tends to die, right? And then the second is also that it requires a lot of space, the root zone treatment for grey water, and it requires a lot of maintenance. So if you're not using it that much, the water component is actually very less, then your output is also very less, and hence the amount of water that you're getting, which is clean water, which you can use for landscaping, is again a very small quantity. So when we do the math and see whether all of these resources in building it, investing the land that's required for that system for second homes, it doesn't make sense for us to do grey water management in Goa for second homes.
And is that true for solid waste as well?
I mean, I think one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that you should not practice sustainability or incorporate sustainable techniques just to check boxes, right? So don't do it because it is a talking point. It has to be appropriate to the place where you're building, for the family that you're building for, and for the use, basically. So, for example, solar energy, right? It really works for places where the government has a policy of net metering, say Maharashtra. So Maharashtra, you see a lot of solar panels, and it's great. So basically you generate your solar energy and you can put it back in the grid, and you get a rebate on your electricity bill, right? But Goa doesn't have that. So then if we have to implement solar panels here for generating energy, we have to store it, and storing of solar energy is highly inefficient and expensive at this point.
So I think you're not mindlessly applying strategies any site to any project. You also have to think about specifically for that project, does it make sense or not?
Exactly, specific for that site, specific, as I said, for the user. How are they intending to use the space?
So as you go from textbooks to real life implementation of some of these strategies, have you had to learn and unlearn some things along the way? Have there been principles and ideals that you've had to abandon?
That's a good question, Suneet. Of course, many, right? Many mistakes, hopefully several learnings along the way, and, learning to do things better. One key feature in Goa is, of course, the monsoon. Monsoon in Goa is very intense, and we've had to really learn how to build with that monsoon, how to build homes that are contemporary, but yet they work well with the Goa monsoon, especially the roofs. The second one is that when we started, we had this moral principle that we will not cut any trees on any of the sites where we go. We will build around the trees and integrate the trees into the architecture of our homes. And we've had to abandon that or make, certain compromises as we go along. I'll give you an example. In one of the homes that we did, there was an existing coconut grove, and a small one, and we wanted to insert a building into that coconut grove. What ended up happening was that there were about 6 or 7 coconut trees, and this is not a very old coconut grove, it's fairly young, planted by the previous owner. And we realized there were 6 or 7 trees, and instead of cutting them, we thought we will transplant them to another location on the site itself. So we did a lot of research. We, looked it up. Coconut trees are generally considered as a fairly friendly species for transplanting because their roots are not very spread, they're more contained. And we worked with our horticulturist, and he was the one who actually did the transplanting. And it is a bit embarrassing for me to admit this on camera, but all the trees died. We did transplant them. We spent the money, the resources, the time, the energy, but none of them survived. So that was a big failure at our end. Again, we just hope to learn from it. And if we ever have to do it again, we hope to do it better and, hopefully have a better success rate there. And then the other story that comes to my mind is about this beautiful kokum tree that was key to the design of Houseway 3 pavilions, where, it was an existing giant kokum tree that we found on the site, and it had such a majestic presence on the site that it was the starting point for our design. So 2 of the pavilions of the house were positioned around the kokum tree, and the kokum tree courtyard was something that was supposed to connect these 2 pavilions. And once again, we were very careful. We positioned the pavilions fairly away from the tree. They were not touching the tree, and everything was going well. We dug the foundations. The tree was alive. It was a habitat for parrots, actually. And but as the house was reaching its finishing stage, the tree sadly died. And it was actually very sad for our entire team, a very tragic kind of episode. And the kokum tree courtyard became a courtyard without the kokum tree.
I can imagine. I mean, it must be so sad and sort of disappointing, because your intent is obviously in the right place, and you're trying to put all the education and research at work on site, and sometimes, it just doesn't go your way.
It really doesn't. I mean, our intent is in the right place, our heart is in the right place, and we on our end try to do a lot of research. So we're not just going in blind when we're executing any of these techniques. But there are times when there are failures, and all we want to do is learn from those mistakes.
Sometimes our research also has to catch up with nature.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you start to look up, I mean, once a tree died, we actually also did a lot of research to figure out why it died, but we couldn't actually identify a reason for it. But most probably there was maybe a tap root that was very critical to the tree, which was somehow
severed or something.
Cut or severed during construction.
I know you've done some talks in the past. You've spoken about doing some workshops and spreading the word out there, spreading information out there, making it available to the public. Do you see that as your contribution to helping, expand knowledge on the subject?
I do hope so. I mean, there's only limited work that we can do as a practice, but I do believe in spreading the word as much as possible, and with the internet and social media we can do that a lot. So during COVID, we actually had these Instagram lives where we spoke to practitioners and experts about sustainability techniques, and it was really about talking about implementation. So it was not just about the feel-good factor of these sustainable techniques, but it was about what does it take to implement them, what are the calculations that need to be made, what are the challenges, what went wrong in some of your projects, so we can learn lessons from them. Then we wrote those interviews as articles for A+D magazine, and even then we actually did these box texts which were takeaways, key takeaways. So it's really about not converting people who don't believe in sustainability, but our hope is to first at least reach out to the huge population who already believes in it, believes in sustainability, but doesn't know how to. And the other problem with sustainability is that there is this aura of confusion. There are things are vague, because if you talk about rammed earth or you talk about grey water treatment, even if you ask experts, the answers are not clear. They're not straight, right? They're all kind of roundabout about, it depends. It depends on your site. It depends on your soil. It depends on the water. And these are the things that add confusion. And a lot of practitioners and clients are hence afraid to implement these techniques, because you don't want to spend money if it's not going to work, right? You don't want to invest time if it's not going to work. And then you have to live with the mistake, right? And then in fact you're actually spending more money rectifying the mistake, and not just the money, but it's also not sustainable. If you build something, it doesn't work, then you have to remove it, you're creating more waste, not sustainable. So the point is, the knowledge and the skill for some of these techniques is not widely available, it becomes a deterrent for large-scale implementation and scale. But these techniques are not tough, and we just need more clear, more actionable information out there.
The last thing I want to get into is the scalability of an idea like this, of a practice like this. You're not just working, you're working geographically within a certain area. You're also working with a certain sort of clientele, which is luxury homes. So how do you see this practice evolving and sort of taking this to the next level?
We love what we do. We are now building outside of Goa quite often. We have a few projects outside of Bangalore. We have a project in Chennai. We've done a project outside of Lonavala. Most of our houses are built on large greenfield sites outside of the cities with beautiful locations, beautiful views and all of that. The one that is very different is the one we're doing in Chennai, which is urban. It's right at the heart of central Chennai, very high density site and environment. But we're sticking to our principles and we're doing a building with the concept of an urban jungle.
So how do you do that within like a very tight site?
The beauty of that house will be that once you're hanging out in their balcony or their living room, we hope that the experience will not be very different from the experiencing we have here. Where there will be breeze, there will be the sound of the rustling of the leaves, there will be the birds and, the insects and lots of natural light without the heat. So what we are doing there is that on the south and the west facade, we are covering the building with a green screen that creates a buffer and direct heat doesn't hit the external walls, hence keeps the interior cooler, which is very important in a place like Chennai, which is getting hotter with climate change. The front facade is extremely transparent, just like the buildings that we build in our greenfield sites in Goa and elsewhere, which is punctuated by this central veranda balcony. And again, a green screen on the front facade where we will be planting species that attract the birds and the butterflies and the dragonflies. And the homeowners, even while living in central Chennai, will actually be living amongst nature and amongst the flora and fauna of Chennai.
So do you feel like you're almost presenting an alternative benchmark for urban environments as well?
I hate self-grandizing, so I wouldn't say that I'm creating an example. I think there are a lot of people doing very, very amazing things. But maybe for ourselves, we are creating this example. This is the first building we're doing in the urban context. And, the principles that we apply here of indoor-outdoor spaces, of coexisting with nature, of really leaning on natural light, natural ventilation. We're trying to apply all of those in a very tight urban site with requirements of X number of bedrooms and X number of bathrooms. So if we are successful there in creating, still creating privacy, security, and achieving indoor-outdoor spaces transparency, then I think we'll be very successful, and we hope to do more of that.
So thank you so much, Anjali, for sitting down with us and for your candor.
Thank you, Suneet.
This conversation has been incredibly insightful for us. It's helped us understand how to tread lightly on the earth and to peacefully coexist without romanticizing the idea of sustainability.